When people talk about sex, they usually talk about presence, about activity, about expression. What is rarely examined is absence. Not short absence, not a pause, but prolonged absence. Because absence is not neutral. It does not simply remove something, it reorganizes what remains. When a woman lives without sex for an extended period of time, nothing dramatic happens at first. There is no sudden frustration, no visible collapse, no obvious emotional shift. What happens instead is quieter. The nervous system adapts. Desire does not disappear, it regulates itself. The body is designed to seek balance. When stimulation stops arriving from the outside, the system slowly adjusts its expectations. This adjustment happens long before it is noticed consciously. The emotional highs soften, the lows stabilize, reactivity decreases. From the outside, this can look like calm or maturity or even emotional strength. But internally, something very specific is occurring. Desire is no longer oriented outward. It is no longer waiting for response. It is no longer scanning for activation. It turns inward. An inward desire behaves very differently from expressed desire. When desire is expressed regularly, it stays flexible, responsive, easily activated. When desire remains unexpressed, it becomes diffuse, less specific, less reactive, more abstract. This does not mean a woman loses interest in intimacy. It means intimacy stops organizing her emotional landscape. Other needs quietly take priority: calm, stability, predictability. This shift does not feel like loss. It feels like regulation, and because it feels stable, it is rarely questioned. This is why men often misinterpret what they see later. They assume that absence creates tension, that desire builds pressure, that unfulfilled intimacy leads to frustration. Sometimes it does, but over time, the system adapts. What once created longing now creates quiet. The nervous system lowers its baseline. This has an important psychological consequence. Emotional sensitivity changes. Without regular stimulation, the threshold for activation rises. Small signals no longer register the same way. Subtle cues pass unnoticed. Emotional spikes flatten. This is not emotional numbness, it is emotional economy. The system learns to conserve energy. From the outside, this can look like distance or indifference or emotional reserve. But internally, it feels organized. Nothing feels missing. Nothing feels urgent. And this is the part that is rarely spoken about because it contradicts a common assumption that absence always creates hunger. Psychologically, prolonged absence often creates adaptation. A woman who lives without sex for a long time does not experience constant desire waiting to be satisfied. She experiences a restructured internal rhythm. Desire becomes less demanding, less noisy, less central. It does not vanish, it settles. This is why emotional expression often changes, not abruptly, but gradually. Responses become measured, reactions slow down, the need to engage decreases. From the outside, men often interpret this as coldness, but internally, it does not feel cold, it feels calm, and calm is rarely explained, because calm does not demand justification. There is another subtle shift that occurs during prolonged absence. Desire becomes less attached to external validation. When intimacy is absent, self-regulation increases. A woman relies less on feedback, less on reaction, less on being desired to feel balanced. This creates independence, but it also creates distance, because desire that does not rely on response does not reach outward easily. It stays contained. This containment changes how attraction functions later, but that belongs to what comes next. For now, what matters is this: living without sex does not create emptiness. It creates a new internal equilibrium. An equilibrium that is quieter, more self-contained, less reactive. And because this equilibrium feels stable, it is rarely named, rarely discussed, rarely admitted. Not because it is shameful, but because it does not feel like a problem. It simply feels like the system has adjusted. In the next part, We will look at how this internal reorganization begins to shape perception, attraction, and emotional behavior because what adapts internally eventually becomes visible externally. And when that happens, it is often misunderstood. When an internal equilibrium changes, it does not announce itself. It begins to shape perception quietly. What reorganized inside during prolonged absence does not stay internal forever. It slowly alters how attraction is experienced, how connection is evaluated, and how emotional signals are interpreted. This is where most misunderstandings begin. Because from the outside, the change looks personal, but psychologically, it is structural. When a woman has lived without sex for a long time, desire no longer operates on immediacy. It does not activate quickly, it does not surge suddenly, and it does not respond easily to small signals. The threshold has changed. What once might have felt stimulating now feels neutral. What once created anticipation now feels familiar. This does not mean attraction is impossible. It means it is no longer automatic. Desire, when left unexpressed for long periods, becomes selective. Not consciously selective, but neurologically restrained. The nervous system, having adapted to lower stimulation, no longer reacts to mild emotional input. Stronger signals are required to register the same internal response, and this is often interpreted incorrectly. Men notice reduced reaction and assume lack of interest. They notice slower engagement and assume emotional closure. But what they are witnessing is not rejection, it is inaccessibility. Attraction has not disappeared, it has moved deeper. This creates a paradox. A woman may feel internally stable, grounded, and calm, while the man perceives distance because attraction no longer expresses itself outwardly. It remains contained. Contained desire does not announce itself. It does not chase. It does not signal. And without signaling, men are left to interpret silence. This is where many men over 50 struggle most. You come from a time where signals mattered, where interest showed itself, where distance meant something was wrong. So when emotional expression fades without conflict, it feels unsettling. You look for cause. You look for explanation. You look for something you can respond to. But the system you are trying to engage is no longer organized around response. It is organized around self-regulation. This changes how intimacy is prioritized. When sex is absent for a long time, intimacy stops being the central organizing force. Other elements move forward: predictability, emotional quiet, personal rhythm. The idea of intimacy no longer pulls attention automatically. It becomes optional rather than necessary. This does not feel like loss internally. It feels like control, and control is comfortable. This is why men often misread this phase. They assume absence creates unmet need. They assume unmet need creates tension. They assume tension seeks release. But prolonged absence often removes urgency. Urgency is replaced by balance, and balance does not ask to be disrupted. So when a man enters this landscape with expectation, with eagerness, with emotional availability, he may feel strangely ineffective, not rejected, but not received either. This is deeply confusing because nothing is openly wrong. There is no conflict, no resistance, no refusal, just a lack of response. And men often interpret lack of response as disinterest, but psychologically, it is often inertia. The system has settled into a low reactivity state. To change that state requires more than presence, more than effort, more than reassurance, because reassurance addresses insecurity, not regulation. And regulation has already been achieved. This is why attempts to rekindle often fail at this stage. They are aimed at emotion, but the system is no longer emotionally hungry. They are aimed at desire, but desire has learned to remain dormant. This does not mean desire cannot return, but it does mean it will not return on command. It will not respond to persuasion, and it will not respond to logic. It responds only when the internal equilibrium shifts again. This is rarely acknowledged openly because it contradicts a powerful belief that desire always waits. Psychologically, desire adapts. An adapted desire does not behave the way remembered desire did. For men, this can feel deeply personal. You may assume you arrived too late, that something has closed, that intimacy is no longer possible. But the reality is more neutral. The system has simply learned to function without stimulation, and systems resist change once stability is achieved. This brings us to the final misunderstanding. Men often assume silence is a message. They search for meaning in it. But silence in this context is not communication. It is absence of need. When nothing is needed, nothing is signaled. And without signals, men feel excluded from the process because there is nothing to respond to. This is not cruelty, and it is not punishment. It is adaptation reaching equilibrium. Living without sex does not empty a woman. It reorganizes her. And once reorganized, the emotional system becomes quieter, more inward, and less reactive to external input. This is why attraction may feel distant even when respect remains, why warmth may feel muted even when comfort exists, why connection feels calm but not alive. These changes are rarely explained because they do not feel like loss internally. They feel like balance, and balance does not seek explanation. This channel exists to describe these quiet reorganizations, not to judge them, not to fix them, but to understand them before they are misunderstood. New observations every week.